At 20 years old, my father stood in front of our entire family and told me I was no longer his son. He didn't shout it. That's the part that still catches me, even now. He said it the same way he used to read out a bid to a client, flat and final, like a number that had already been checked twice. 7 years later, he was dead. And at the reading of his will, my brother inherited the family excavation company. My sister got the house and the land behind it, and I got one thing: a rusted 20-year-old pickup truck that hadn't run in years, parked behind a shed like something nobody wanted to look at too closely. My Uncle Wendell laughed when the lawyer read my name. Guess Dale finally gave you exactly what he thought you were worth. I believed him for about 3 days. Then I forced open that truck's glove box and found something that made me question everything I thought I understood about the night my father put me out on the road with one bag and no explanation. My name is Corbin Voss. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where everybody knew whose truck belonged in whose driveway and whose didn't. My family had run Voss Excavation for 3 generations, ever since my grandfather cleared his first stump lot with a borrowed dozer back in the 60s. By the time I was old enough to hold a shovel the right way, it employed 22 people across 3 crews, and it was the only version of the future anyone in my family had ever imagined for me. I want to tell you about the truck before I tell you about the night everything ended, because the truck mattered to me long before it became an inheritance. I was 15 the first time my father let me drive it. It was already old then, a working truck, not a nice one. The kind with a bench seat and a radio that only picked up one station clearly. He pulled it into the gravel lot behind the equipment shed on a Sunday afternoon, cut the engine, and told me to get behind the wheel. "Clutch is stiff," he said. "Don't baby it. Just be honest with it." I remember laughing at that, because it sounded like something you'd say about a person, not a truck. He didn't laugh back. He just watched me grind the gears twice before I got the feel of it, patient in a way he wasn't always patient, and when I finally got it rolling smooth across that lot, he nodded once, like I'd passed some test he hadn't told me I was taking. "A man's worth isn't in what he owns," he said, staring out the windshield instead of at me. "It's in what he refuses to lie about, even when lying would be easier." I was 15. I didn't understand yet how much weight that sentence was going to carry, or how strange it would feel 5 years later to watch him fail his own rule in the worst possible way. There's another memory from around that same year that I've turned over more times than I can count since. A customer had overpaid us by almost $400 on a driveway job, a mistake in our own invoicing, not his. My father noticed it 2 weeks later, going through the books on a Sunday night, and instead of letting it slide the way plenty of contractors would have, he drove out to the man's house himself, knocked on the door, and handed him a check for the difference. "We could have kept that," I said, riding back with him in the truck afterward. "He never would have known." "I'd have known," my father said. "That's usually the only person who matters." I believed him completely back then. I didn't yet understand that a man could hold that kind of principle in one hand and, years later, betray it in the other. The moment the truth became inconvenient enough to cost him something he loved more than being right. There's a scratch on the inside of that dashboard, just below the radio, shaped almost like a lowercase r. I put it there myself at 16, dropping a socket wrench while helping him change a headlight, and he made me feel bad about it for exactly one sentence before he let it go. Every time I got in that truck as a teenager, I'd catch myself running my thumb over that scratch without thinking about it. I didn't know, back then, that it would end up being one of the only things about my childhood that survived intact into my 20s. The summer I turned 20, I was working full crew hours for the company, still trying to earn the kind of trust that Holden, my older half-brother, had been born into. My Uncle Wendell ran the crews, my father ran the office, and I was just another laborer on my own family's job sites, digging trenches, hoping one of them would finally see me as something more than the kid who showed up late to the family. We were cutting a utility trench that summer, 8 feet down through wet clay that had been sliding for days. I noticed the walls bulging on a Tuesday morning and said something to Wendell about shoring it properly before we kept digging. "It'll hold till Thursday," he told me. "We'll pull the boxes off another job and shore it then. Don't slow the crew down over a couple inches of give." I didn't push it. I was 20, and pushing back against a man who'd run those crews since before I was born felt like a good way to prove I still didn't belong there. Wednesday afternoon, 6 feet of trench wall came down on top of a 17-year-old named Cody Renner, whose father Denny had worked for us for 20 years. We got him out in under 2 minutes. It felt longer than that. He came out with a broken collarbone, cracked ribs, and a concussion, and for about the longest 30 seconds of my life, none of us were sure he was breathing at all. He lived. He's fine now. But that afternoon, kneeling in that half-collapsed trench with Denny screaming his son's name from the road, I understood for the first time that my father's rule about honesty had a hole in it big enough to bury a person. That night, I asked Wendell what he planned to tell the county inspector about the shoring. "Nothing," he said. "There's nothing to tell." Kid slipped. "The wall came down, Wendell. I watched it happen. You watched clay settle in a trench that's been dug and redug 6 times this month," he said, looking at me the way you'd look at somebody you were deciding whether or not to bother arguing with. "You want to keep working for this company. You learn the difference between what you saw and what you say happened." I found the real safety log 2 days later in a drawer in the site trailer, still in Wendell's handwriting, dated a full day after the collapse. He'd rewritten it to make it look like the trench had already been inspected and cleared. I sat on that for 4 days. I told myself Denny would handle it, since it was his own son who'd nearly died. But Denny came to me himself on the 5th day, looking like he hadn't slept, and told me Wendell had already had a quiet word with him about how a complaint might affect which crews got the good jobs going forward for him and for anyone who might back him up. That was the moment I stopped waiting for somebody else to do something about it. I called the county building and safety office from a payphone outside the IGA, anonymous, because I didn't trust my own name not to get traced back through the office. I told them exactly what I'd seen and where to find the real log. The investigation cost the company its biggest contract that year, a township road job that would have carried us through the winter and put a formal citation on the books for unsafe trenching. Wendell told my father it was sabotage. He built a story, piece by piece, about a 20-year-old who'd never quite felt like he belonged in that family, who'd been passed over for a foreman spot Holden had gotten at 22, who might, Wendell suggested, have wanted to see the Golden Company knock down a peg out of resentment. My father called a family dinner 2 weeks later. I remember the exact number of people at that table, because I counted them twice while I waited to understand what was happening. 12, you went behind this family's back, my father said, to protect yourself and take this company down over some resentment I didn't even know you were carrying. 22 families depend on what we built here. Corbin, 22. That's not what happened, I said. Ask Denny. Ask Cody. The trench wasn't shored and Wendell falsified the log after the fact. I have the original. Don't bring Wendell into this, my father said. And something in the way he said it told me the decision had already been made before I walked in the door. He's run crews for this company for 30 years without one serious injury before this. 30 years. And I'm supposed to believe you, 20 years old, over him? I looked at Wendell. He didn't say a single word in his own defense. He just watched me with the calm of a man who has already won and is only waiting for it to become official. You're no longer my son, my father said. Get out. I packed one bag that night. I remember standing in the driveway for a long moment, looking at the equipment shed where that old pickup truck sat parked in the dark, and thinking, with a kind of bitterness I didn't know I was capable of at 20, that even the truck had more of a place in that family than I did anymore. I didn't speak to my father again for 7 years. I'm not going to spend a long time on those years, because they're not the part of this story that matters most, but I want you to understand at least the shape of them, because they're the reason everything that came later hit as hard as it did. I slept in my own truck, a different one, an old Ranger I'd bought myself the year before for the first 11 nights, parked behind a church whose pastor agreed to look the other way as long as I kept the lot clean. A diner owner named Marisol gave me dishwork without asking a single question about why a Voss kid was washing plates for tip money. A mechanic named Gus, who'd known my father since they were both teenagers and never said one word about him one way or the other, taught me small engine repair on slow afternoons in exchange for me sweeping his shop floor. I remember one night in particular, maybe 8 months in, sitting at the counter of Marisol's diner after close, too tired to drive home to the studio apartment I could barely afford. She set down a slice of pie I hadn't ordered and didn't charge me for, and when I told her she didn't have to keep doing that, she just shrugged. "You're not the first kid this town's family business chewed up and spit out," she said. "Won't be the last either. Eat the pie, Corbin." I asked her once, months later, if she'd ever known my father personally. She said she had, a little, years back, and that he'd always struck her as a man who was good at building things and bad at admitting when one of them had gone wrong. I didn't understand yet how right she was, or how long it would take him to prove it. By the second year, I was doing handyman work under my own name. By the fourth, I had my own small outfit, 3 employees, a used flatbed, and a handful of standing contracts. It wasn't Voss Excavation. It was never going to be. But it was mine, and nobody in it had ever falsified a safety log to save face. I heard things secondhand, the way you do in a town that size. That the company recovered, slower than expected. That Holden had taken over more of the daily running of things as my father's health started to slip. That Wendell was still field supervisor, still running crews his own way. I heard, twice over those 7 years, that my father had asked around about me, whether I was doing all right, whether anyone had seen me. I didn't know what to do with that information at the time. I still don't fully know what to do with it now. Then on a Tuesday in October, my sister Briar called for the first time in 7 years to tell me our father had died of a heart attack. I almost didn't go to the reading. What finally decided it for me was Marisol telling me I didn't have to forgive him to show up, because those were 2 different things. Holden was there, gray coming in at his temples, running the company the way he had always been groomed to. Briar was there, quieter than I remembered. 12 years of living outside that family, having worn some of the hardness off her. Wendell was there too, 61, still built like a man half his age, watching me come in with an expression that gave away nothing. The lawyer read the will in the flat language that turns a person's whole life into subsections. Holden got the company, Briar got the house, and then he reached my name, and the room went the particular kind of quiet that tells you everyone already knows something you don't. To my son Corbin, I leave my 1998 Ford F-150, currently stored at the equipment yard, and nothing further. Wendell laughed. Guess Dale finally gave you exactly what he thought you were worth. Nobody corrected him. Holden looked at the table. Briar looked at me with an expression somewhere between pity and apology. I drove out to the equipment yard alone that afternoon. The truck was parked behind the shed, half swallowed by weeds, a bird's nest built into the gap behind the front wheel well, the windshield cracked corner to corner, the paint gone from red to a dull rust brown in patches across the hood. I ran my thumb along the dash without thinking about it and found the little R-shaped scratch still there, exactly where 16-year-old me had left it. I had it towed to Gus's shop that same week. Mechanically, it's not as bad as it looks, Gus told me after going over it for the better part of an hour. Your dad kept up the maintenance even after he stopped driving it regular. Battery's dead, fuel line's shot, tires are done. But the engine's sound, that's not nothing. The glove box, though, wouldn't budge at all. Not stuck, jammed, like something had shifted and wedged the latch mechanism from behind on purpose. Probably just warped with age, Gus said. I can pop the panel if you want, save you the trouble. I told him I'd handle it myself. Some part of me needed to be the one who found out what was in there, if anything was in there at all. It took most of a Saturday evening, working carefully with a screwdriver so I wouldn't crack the brittle old plastic. When the door finally dropped free, Something inside hit the panel on its way down. Taped to the underside of the dash was a small metal tin, wrapped twice in electrical tape gone yellow and brittle with age. Inside it, a USB drive, a brass key I didn't recognize, and a single folded sheet of paper in my father's square, deliberate handwriting. If Wendell offers to buy this truck, do not sell it. No signature, no explanation, just 11 words of warning from a dead man about his own brother. I sat in that cab a long time before I could make myself move. The library had the only computer I trusted to plug that drive into. It was an audio file, recorded 14 months before my father died, his voice rougher than I remembered, alone somewhere at night. Corbin, if you're hearing this, it means you found the one thing in this whole estate I actually wanted you to have. He talked about guilt for almost a minute before he said the sentence I'd waited 7 years to hear. I found the real safety log, the one Wendell buried. Compared it to his version myself. You told the truth that night, and I chose my brother because it was easier than believing this company had a hole in it that deep. There's no apology that fixes 7 years, so I'm not going to try to make this one sound clean. I had to stop the recording there for a while. When I started it again, his voice had changed. Quieter, more careful. Wendell's still running crews the same way he always has. I'm not going to lay everything out here, because I don't fully trust that this drive won't end up in the wrong hands before it ends up in yours. There's a storage unit under my name. Wendell doesn't know it exists. The key in this tin opens it. Unit 114, Storage World on Route 31. Everything I couldn't say out loud is in there. I don't know how to fix 7 years with a truck and a recording, Corbin. I just need the truth to survive me, and I need you to be careful who finds out you're looking. The recording ended there, and it left more open than it answered. What exactly Wendell had done, beyond one buried log, why my father sounded afraid of his own brother finding this before I did, and why, of all his children, he'd trusted me with it instead of Holden, the one actually inheriting the company. I didn't tell anyone yet. I wanted to understand what I was holding first. 3 days later, Wendell showed up at Gus's shop, hands in his pockets, circling the truck slow. "Heard you got the old girl running," he said. "Tell you what, I'll buy it off you. Double what it's worth. Sentimental thing, is all. It's not for sale, Wendell." Something tightened behind his eyes, there and gone. "Everything's for sale for the right number, Corbin." He left without pushing it. But 2 nights later, I found the truck's front tire slashed in my own driveway. Nothing else touched. Nothing stolen. Just a message, delivered quiet enough that I couldn't prove who'd sent it, and loud enough that I understood exactly what it meant. I called Briar before I called anyone else. She'd been the one person in that family who never fully closed the door on me, even during the 7 years I stayed away. "You think Wendell did that?" she asked when I told her about the tire. "I don't know yet. I think Dad believed he was capable of worse." She went quiet on the line for a moment. "Corbin, I need you to understand something before you go further with this. Wendell basically raised half of us kids while Dad was buried in the office. I don't want to believe he's the kind of man who'd hide something that got a kid hurt. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying it's hard. I'm not asking you to hate him," I said. "I'm asking you to help me find out what actually happened." She agreed, reluctantly, and it was 2 days later that she called me back sounding different, quieter. "Dad started acting strange the last couple years," she said. "He'd disappear for whole afternoons and never say where. I always figured it was grief catching up to him late. Last month, going through his desk, I found a folder of newspaper clippings, local business openings. I didn't think anything of it at the time." "What kind of business openings?" She hesitated. "One of them was you. The write-up the paper did when you opened your shop. He'd circled your name." I didn't say anything for a long moment. "He never called," she said. "But I don't think that means he wasn't watching." That conversation sat heavier with me than almost anything else that week. I drove out to Storage World the next morning before I'd even had coffee. Unit 114 opened on the first try. Inside were boxes in my father's handwriting, the real safety records from the Renner Trench, and paperwork on a second accident I hadn't known about yet, involving a man named Marcus Boyle who'd fallen from unsecured scaffolding 2 years after Cody's collapse and broken his leg in 2 places. It had been settled quietly through insurance and never reported the way it should have been, because Wendell made sure it never reached my father's desk in a form that would raise questions. There were years of invoices, too, showing safety equipment billed to specific jobs and never actually used on site. It wasn't complicated once it was laid out in front of me. My father had spent over a year quietly building a case against his own brother, one buried record at a time. One box near the back was different. It was simply labeled Corbin. Inside it were the clippings Breyer had mentioned, going back 4 years my shop's opening, a small write-up when I took on my first full crew, a photo somebody had taken of me at a community fundraiser I didn't remember my father ever being near. Underneath the clippings was a half-finished letter, dated only 8 months before he died. Corbin, I don't expect you to answer this. I don't think I've earned that yet. I've been keeping track of you longer than I should probably admit, because it was easier than admitting I didn't know how to pick up a phone and say I was wrong. I'm proud of what you built without any of us. I wish I'd told you that, while it still would have meant something coming from me. It stopped there, mid-sentence, like he'd meant to come back to it and run out of time. There was one more thing in that box, a receipt from a medical billing office in Traverse City, dated 18 months back, for a payment made anonymously toward Marcus Boyle's outstanding physical therapy costs. My father had never told anyone he'd done it. He'd found out the truth about a man he'd never met getting hurt because of something his own company covered up, and instead of fixing it the right way, he'd quietly tried to pay down the damage from a distance, the same way he was trying to quietly pay down what he owed me. It didn't excuse 7 years of silence. I want to be honest about that. It just made the shape of his guilt more complicated than I expected. I sat in that storage unit a long time before I could make myself move again. I called Denny Renner that week. I always figured your dad knew more than he let on toward the end, he told me, over coffee at Marisol's Diner. He started asking me strange questions a couple years back. Real specific ones. About dates, about who signed what. I thought it was just guilt catching up to an old man. It was, I said, just too slow. Denny gave me a name I hadn't thought about in years, Salagir, a foreman who'd quit Voss Excavation not long after the Boyle accident and never said why. I found him working at a lumber yard 2 towns over, and he wasn't eager to talk at first. I've got a pension I'm not trying to lose over old business, he told me, leaning against a stack of pallets, not quite looking at me. Nobody's asking you to lose anything, I said. I just need to know if what I found matches what you saw. He was quiet for a long moment before he answered. Wendell used to tell us the paperwork was his problem, not ours. Said if we did the work right and kept our mouths shut about the parts that weren't, everybody kept their job. I told myself that was just how construction worked everywhere. Took me a while to admit it wasn't. Would you say that, on record, if it came to it? He didn't answer right away, and I understood, watching him, that some people would help me quietly and never further than that, and I'd have to make peace with getting the truth in pieces instead of all at once. I'll think about it, he said, which wasn't a yes, but wasn't a no either. Wendell came back once more, and this time there was no pretending it was sentiment. That truck is company property, he said. Anything found in it belongs to the estate. You want to test that in court? We can test it. You know exactly what's in it, don't you? I know your father went digging up things that were already settled, he said. Marcus got a payout and a new job. You blow this up, you're the one who cost 20 families their paychecks, not me. You hit a man's broken leg from your own brother for 2 years, Wendell. That's not paperwork. That's people. He didn't deny it outright. He told me I hadn't been there for the 30 years he'd spent keeping the company alive, as if that erased what I now had proof of, and drove off before I could answer him. I brought everything to Holden the following week. He didn't react the way I hoped. You show up 7 years later, with a hard drive and some old boxes. "And you want me to believe you're not here to burn this company down over what happened to you," he said. "You have any idea what this would cost us if it got out the wrong way? Contracts, jobs, everything Grandpa and Dad spent their whole lives building. I'm not here for the company, Holden. I'm here because Dad asked me to make sure nobody else gets hurt the way Cody did. Convenient that it's also the same company that kicked you out." I left his office that day without either of us agreeing on anything, and for a week, I genuinely believed he was going to side with Wendell, the way our father once had. Holden told me later that Wendell came to see him twice that week, before he'd made up his mind about anything. The first time, Wendell talked numbers contracts that could evaporate, crews that could lose work, a reputation 3 generations deep that could collapse over what he kept calling old business, already settled. The second time, he talked about family, about the years he'd spent teaching Holden everything he knew, about loyalty being worth more than a piece of paper from a kid who'd already been cut out of the will once for less. "I almost let that be enough," Holden admitted to me afterward. "Not because I didn't believe you, because believing you meant tearing apart the one thing I had left of Dad. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to do that to myself twice in 1 year. What changed his mind wasn't the recording or the paperwork, not directly. It was walking one of the active job sites himself, unannounced, on a Thursday afternoon, and finding a trench that hadn't been properly shored either the same shortcut 7 years later. Still being taken by the same crews under the same supervisor, as if none of it had ever cost anyone anything at all. I stood at the edge of that trench for a long time, he told me. I kept thinking about Cody Renner and how close we came to burying a 17-year-old kid because it was easier than losing 2 hours of work. And I realized if I didn't do something now, I'd be the one making Dad's exact mistake, except I wouldn't even have the excuse of not knowing better. 2 days after that, someone broke into Storage World. Nothing else in the building was touched. Unit 114 had been gone through, and the box of original invoices, the paper trail tying safety equipment purchases to jobs where it had never been used, was missing. I called Holden before I called anyone else, my hands not quite steady. "It's gone," I told him. The invoices, somebody knew exactly what to take. There was a long pause on the line. "I still have copies," Holden said finally. Dad mailed a duplicate set of everything to me 11 months ago. No note, just a return address I didn't recognize until now. I filed it without opening half of it. I think some part of him didn't trust just one copy to survive. That was the piece that finally convinced Holden, more than anything I'd shown him myself, proof that our father hadn't only reached out to me in secret. He'd built in a second safeguard, quietly, for the son who was actually going to inherit the business because some part of him understood exactly how far Wendell might go to protect himself. Holden called a meeting at the office before he made anything official and told Wendell to be there. I came too, at Holden's request, along with Briar, who'd finally read enough of what I'd gathered to stop hoping there was an innocent explanation left to find. Wendell must have known, walking in, what was coming, because he didn't bother with any of the easy warmth he usually led with. "You're going to let him do this," he said to Holden, not even looking at me. "Over a kid who slipped, and a settlement that was handled fair and square. Sal Aguirre's willing to talk," Holden said quietly. "So is Denny. And I walked the Miller Road site myself last week and found a trench that wasn't shored right, exactly the way Corbin described from 7 years ago. I can't unsee that, Wendell. I wish I could. I built half of what you're standing in," Wendell said. "I trained you. I trained your father before you. You're going to throw that away over paperwork?" "It's not paperwork," Briar said, and it was the first time she'd spoken since walking in. "It's a kid who almost died, and a man with a broken leg you never let Dad find out about, and I don't know how to look at you the same way after knowing that." Wendell didn't answer her. He looked at me instead, something almost like grief moving across his face for just a moment before it hardened back into the same flat certainty he'd warned 7 years earlier at that dinner table. "Your father made his choice a long time ago," he said. Seems like you're all trying real hard to undo it. He tried to undo it himself, I said. Just too late to do it to your face. Nobody said anything else worth remembering after that. Wendell left the office without another word, and 2 days later, Holden reported everything with his own name attached to the Renner log, the Boyle settlement, the pattern of billed but unused safety equipment, which cost him more upfront than an anonymous call ever would have. Wendell was let go from the company within the month. He never apologized, not to me, not to Denny, not to Marcus Boyle. He moved out of town and still tells anyone who will listen that the whole thing was blown far out of proportion, that a family like ours eats its own for less than what he built over 30 years. Some people don't come around. My father's recording had never promised that Wendell would. It only promised the truth would survive him. Breyer was there the day Holden finally told Wendell he was done covering for him, standing quietly by the office window while the two of them argued in a way that had clearly been building for 30 years and finally had somewhere to go. She told me afterward that some part of her had known for a long time that something wasn't right about Wendell's silence around certain jobs, and had simply never let herself ask the question out loud. I think I didn't want to be the one who broke this family apart, she said. I didn't realize somebody already had, a long time before you made that phone call. I didn't forgive my father all at once, and I'm not going to pretend I've finished forgiving him even now. Some weeks I understand exactly why he waited as long as he did to try and fix things, quietly, from a distance, too proud or too ashamed to say any of it to my face while he still had the chance. Other weeks, I'm still 20 years old, standing in that living room, waiting for a man who's been dead for months to finally believe me. What I do understand, finally, is that he did believe me, just 7 years too late to say so out loud. I kept the truck. Gus and I spent most of that winter finishing the restoration properly new paint, a rebuilt bench seat, the dash replaced, but the glove box kept exactly as it was. The small dent in the latch from where I'd worked it open still visible if you know where to look. I never touched that little R-shaped scratch below the radio. I sanded around it on purpose. Breyer comes by the shop more than she used to. Holden calls sometimes, still running the company, still carrying the weight of what it cost him to finally do right by it. We're not the family we might have been if none of this had ever happened. I don't think we're pretending to be. But we're something. Now that we weren't for those 7 years. And most days that feels like enough. Last October, on the anniversary of my father's death, I drove that truck out past the old equipment yard, past the shed where it used to sit rusting in the weeds, all the way out to the same gravel lot where he first taught me to drive it at 15. I parked it there, cut the engine, and sat with my hand on the wheel for a long time, the way he used to sit, not saying much of anything. I thought about the man who taught me that honesty was worth more than what you owned, and then spent 7 years failing to live by it, and then spent the last of his time on earth trying, quietly and imperfectly, to make it right in the only language he still trusted, not words, but proof, hidden somewhere his own brother would never think to look. I don't know if that's forgiveness. I've stopped needing to name it exactly. Some days it feels like understanding. Other days it still feels like grief with nowhere left to go. I used to think that truck was the one worthless thing left in his entire estate. It turned out to be the only honest thing he ever gave me, the truth he'd spent 7 years too afraid to say out loud. Finally handed over in the one place he knew his brother would never think to look.